Okay, this week I'd like to introduce you to three photographers, female photographers from the 20th and into the 21st century. They all of the kind of theme of this lecture will be representation and portrait photography. And the first artist I want to introduce you to is Diane Arbus from 1923, and she died in 1971. So Diane Arbus was the daughter of Jewish department store owners in New York City. And the wealth of her parents allowed them to have artistic pursuits. Her father was a painter on the side. Her sister became a sculptor and a designer. Her older brother was able to be a poet and a professor. And Diane became a photographer. So Diane met and married her childhood sweetheart, Alan, at 18, and she received her first camera from him. They both were interested in photography, and they visited Alfred Stieglitz's 291 gallery in 1941 and were really inspired by the work of American artists, photographers at that time. For money, Diane's father employed them to photograph the department store's advertising. And so they became commercial photographers first. Diane was the art director, and Alan took pictures. They contributed to publications with their joint business to magazines like Glamour, 17, and Vogue. But the couple really despised the fashion world and how shallow it was. And so Diane made two decisions which altered the course of her life forever. She was very brave in these decisions because they weren't widely accepted as the right decisions, but they were the right decisions for her life. She quit her job as a commercial photographer, and she quit her business with Alan completely. And then she did divorce from Alan in 1959. So she quit her business in 1956, and then she divorced in 1959, although Alan and Diane remained friends throughout their life. So these two decisions allowed Diane the freedom to explore counterculture of New York City in many ways. So she was able to immerse herself in, bar scenes and things like that. So she was allowed to, she just freed herself to be able to explore the counterculture of New York City. And this became the subject matter of her lifelong body of work. A thing is not seen because it's visible, but conversely, it's visible because it is seen. So she underlined this in her copy of the works of Plato. And I could see how this is really central to our discussion about the power and the importance of photography as a medium. Or art in general. You make things visible because you make them seen. You put, you give attention to subject matter, and then you allow through viewers to come and look at your work, to look at your photographs or to look at your paintings, and you're giving visibility. You're giving focus and visibility onto the subject matter of your choice. And so for Diane, it was countercultures of New York City, and it was people. She was really interested in human expression. So this is a female impersonator's dressing room, New York City, 1958. Kid in blackface with friend, New York City, 1957. So she's a street photographer. And so what she does is she meets people. She walks around with her camera, meeting people, all sorts of people, all types of personalities and lifestyles and belief systems. And she photographs ones that she feels are captivating and are interesting in some way. Right? And this does kind of embody a certain kind of terrible moment in our history. We have here the human pincushion, Ronald C. Harrison, New Jersey, 1962. Humans have a whole variety of ways that we can express ourselves and who we are. And so she found what would be kind of the freaks and the weirdos of the world, right? People that are outcast. People that who are who they are regardless. And so what she does with her photography, I don't know if you can tell, but there's a lot of power given to the subject matter here. There's dignity and respect in the pose, and there's a certain amount of consent too. That's what makes these photographs really powerful. Here is a little bit more confrontational, but you still have these three women. This is the three Puerto Rican women, New York City, 1963. Right? So she's photographing people, all types of people that live in New York City. And what we get is a real sense of the kind of diversity and the just the vibrancy of the city, the vibrancy of all types of people that live in New York. Boy with a straw hat waiting to march in a pro-war parade, New York City, 1967. So she invites consent from her subject matter. And what is so powerful about her photographs is this direct gaze that we see from her subjects. She's not sneakily taking photographs of people without their knowledge and then calling it her work or putting it on display and disrespecting the people that she's photographed. She gives them a tremendous amount of respect and dignity in allowing them to stand and pose for her. And she does this by being their friend. This is Woman and Her Son, New York City, 1965. You know, they're sitting maybe in a park somewhere, and there's something that she finds fascinating about characters and people. Two boys smoking in Central Park, 1962. And this is such a radical departure from something like commercial fashion photography. Commercial fashion photography is very staged and composed, and it's presenting a fictional fantasy version of reality, something that's not real for many, many people. Maybe a select few people can live the lifestyle that you see in commercial photography. And so Diane did this 180 and started to just photograph real people in real life. And so there's such a fascination, I think, from her viewership on her subjects and what she's photographed. Girl in the Circus Costume, Maryland, 1970. Identical Twins. This is probably her most famous photograph. I know it's the cover of her monograph, 1967. Diane was obsessed with pushing boundaries and the search for feeling alive. She often complained of suffering from a deep emptiness, and she always wanted to stand out from the crowd, whether it was the way she dressed or the way that she acted. She wanted to stand apart. She always did stand apart from the crowd, whether or not she did it intentionally or not. It just was who she was. And she was able to make friends with people of all walks of life. She was really open to other people's lives and wanted to befriend them. And then she was able to photograph them in ways that are kind of transcendent. She was fearless, you know, she had a real fearless disposition, especially for a woman in the mid, 20th century. And especially a woman walking the streets of New York in the mid 20th century. She did struggle to make a living with her work most of her life, but later in life she started to achieve some artistic acclaim, and she was offered a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1963, and in 1967 she was featured in a group exhibition called New Documents at the Museum of Modern Art. But in 1971 she committed suicide, and then a year later is when her body of work really exploded. She was the first photographer featured at the Venice Biennale. The Venice Biennale is probably one of the most world-renowned exhibitions of contemporary art in the world. It's an international art exhibition that happens in Venice every 2 years, and the reach is global. Every country nominates an artist to take over a pavilion at the Venice Biennale. So this is a huge honor, and so she's the first photographer featured ever at the Venice Biennale. And she had a retrospective held at the Museum of Modern Art in New York that same year. So a year after she died, she was the first feature in the Venice Biennale of Photography. And then she had a retrospective at MoMA that had the largest audience of any exhibition in the museum's history. Our next photographer is Nan Goldin. And Nan Goldin is a contemporary, or Diane Arbus was a predecessor of Nan Goldin and one of her inspirations. So Nan Goldin, 1953, she's still alive today. She was born in Boston, and the most impactful event of her life, of her early life, was and that really determined the course of her life, was her sister's suicide when Nan was 11. So her sister's sexuality was repressed. Like most women's sexuality has been repressed throughout human history. In this case, her sister's was, and I don't know really the details of any of it, but it led her to lie herself across railroad tracks and commit suicide. Nan was incredibly close to her sister, and this was a tremendous loss. And it led Nan to turn to drug use and also to older men when she was like 13 and 14 years old. When she was 14, she left home. And she entered an alternative high school, which was called the Satya Community School. And there's where she was introduced to the camera. She photographed people that she loved as a way to remember them. And she photographed obsessively everyone who was intimately involved in her life. She did it as a way to memorialize and to pay tribute to her relationships. One of her closest, most intimate relationships was to David Armstrong. They had a partnership. David was gay, but they had a platonic partnership that lasted a lifetime. She was deeply in love with David and vice versa. She met David at Satya, and he introduced Nan to Boston's gay and transgender communities. And she integrated into them, and she photographed drag culture and transgender culture. She attended the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and then she moved to New York City. David moved with her, and they immersed themselves in the subcultures of New York City. Any subculture was of fascinating interest to Nan. Drug culture, punk culture, gay and transgender culture, drag culture. These were the worlds where Nan felt at home. This is Cookie and Millie in the girls' room at the Mud Club, 1979. Greer and Robert on the bed, New York City, 1982. If you can tell here, we're documenting heroin and the heroin epidemic that Nan was also involved in. Nan was constantly high. She wanted to be high from a young age. She found it as her means of escaping reality. I think, like many people, turn to drugs to escape. And so she did. She escaped through it, but she made sure but she photographed obsessively and relentlessly. And so we as viewers now, and now history has a real inside, intimate view, a really raw perspective on the kind of human toll that drug use takes, right? Here's Cookie at Tin Pan Alley, New York City, 1983. Must have been one of her close friends. And this photograph communicates a sense of loss and depression to me, but also introspection, just the look on her friend's face and the way that she's able to capture her. Again, capturing their subject matters with a level of dignity. There's nothing exploitative about any of these photographs because the photographers themselves were deeply invested and ingrained in the cultures that they were representing, which I think is important to keep in mind. Nan and Brian in bed, New York City, 1983. So Nan was involved in an abusive relationship with this man, Brian, and you can get a sense of that here, right? He's looming. You can see she's got actually under her arm there, she's taking a photograph she's able to take a photograph with this. I'm blanking on what the apparatus is called, but she's, has her shutter in this little wired thing attached to the camera. And so she's taking the photograph here, but you see her kind of cowering in bed a little bit, looking at him, and he's looking off, dispassionately smoking a cigarette out the window. And then her most famous and most powerful, one of her most famous photographs is this one, titled Nan 1 Month After Being Battered, 1984. And she took this photograph as a way to reclaim her power and her authority over her own life after she left Brian. This was the last that she was in that abusive relationship. And so we have this kind of direct confrontational depiction of her, close-up of her face. And it's for her to also kind of take ownership over the events and how they've occurred. And she's looking at herself. She's allowing herself to really look at herself and remember this moment so that she never goes back to that again. That's what she said about it. Rise and Monkey Kissing, New York City, 1988. Here's Cookie in her casket, New York City, November 15th, 1989. So she lost many friends to heroin, Cookie being one of them. This kind of like red, eerie red light that this photograph is the primary color being red in the photograph. It has like really emotive and affective qualities to it. Siobhan at the A House, Nude, Provincetown, 1990. Again, we're talking about dignity and respect over the subject matter that you're taking, over your subject or whoever the portrait that you're taking of. Here you have, again, this really intimate, beautiful portrait. I think this was one of Nan's lovers at the time. And you can see there's a kind of careful, loving way that she's photographing her friends. Jimmy Paulette and Taboo in the Bathroom, New York City, 1991. She had said earlier in her life about drag culture was, my desire was to show them as a third gender, as another sexual option, a gender option, and to show them with a lot of respect and love, to kind of glorify them, because I really admire people who can recreate themselves and manifest their fantasies publicly. I think it's brave. This is Self-Portrait in My Blue Bathroom, Berlin, 1991. A lot of Nan's photographs are taken in bathrooms, and her portraits are through mirrors. And so there's this reflection and self-reflection, and the way that it ends up fragmenting the portrait in interesting abstract ways, kind of almost cubist ways. This is more minimal, but she's thinking formally about the compositions of her photographs, and she uses mirrors and things. I think her photographs are formally considered, but there's this kind of direct immediacy in the photographs that she takes. And they're really journalistic and diaristic. They feel like diary entries or journal entries, and we get like a glimpse or a view into somebody's private life, somebody's personal life that they're then putting on display for the public. To provide a different lens on the world, one that's separate than, and this is what is so great about art, is that it allows for a singular perspective or point of view on the world, using techniques and technologies that are also used by some, commercial photographers or magazine, but they provide for like a more raw and real, view into people's lives. This is Gil and Gotzko at Home, Paris, 1992. So here's, two gay men, a couple, and they have a kind of strength to them, right? But a softness too. And then this is Gotzko kissing Gil's on his deathbed. So a lot of her photographs, because of the friendships that she kept, documented the AIDS crisis in the 80s. And the tremendous loss and pain. And you can see it communicated here in this photograph. It's like painful to look at this photograph, because you see this couple, that's this loving couple that is losing each other to a really deadly, painful disease. And she's right there. She's invited to be right there, to document it, to memorialize it, to pay tribute to those that she loves. Probably because she lost her sister. That was such a foundational, painful thing that happened to her in her early life, and because of that, she was able to use that to fuel her artistic practice, and we can just really thank Nan for being able to expose the humanity behind things that are often stereotyped or judged incredibly harshly, people that are judged really harshly. So she also obviously struggled heavily with drug use. Like I said, it was so integral to her photography. She couldn't stop using because she was so afraid that she would lose herself. She would lose her creativity if she stopped, but she finally stopped. She was able to stop and get help at her very bottom. She hit absolute rock bottom and then was able to dig her way out, and she was able to climb out and get sober. These are some photographs that she's made after being sober. And they're more sobering, right? I mean, this is self-portrait on a bridge, Goldin River, Silver Hill Hospital, Connecticut, Silver Hill Hospital, 1998. So we see her as a lone figure, just her shadow, just her silhouette. I mean, there's beautiful texture, but there's also symbolism. Water is very symbolic, rivers flowing, the river of life or the river of your own life passing by, and your reflection, and bridges being, are also really symbolic. So there's some symbolism embedded in this, and it is a self-portrait, and she names it a self-portrait because it accurately represents part of her. So even though we don't see a face, it's like whether or not you're representing the likeness of something or you're representing the essence of something are two different things. And here all of these photographs they start to dig more deeply at the essence of these things, the essence of people and people's humanity, not just their likeness, not just the way they look. This is the last Nan photograph I have, which is Gravestone and Pet Cemetery, Lisbon, 1998. And I just love this photograph because I think it kind of encapsulates maybe the compassion that she had for her friends, even as they struggled with the really, really hard life things that happened in their lives. You never did anything wrong, right? It wasn't your fault. It's not your fault you became a drug addict. It's not your fault you're gay. It's nobody's fault. Life throws you really, really, really hard experiences and people, and you can either be compassionate towards people like Nan, and it's better to be that way, right? So next is Catherine Opie, 1961, still alive today. Catherine Opie was born in Sandusky, Ohio in 1961. She received her first camera at 9 years old. So like both Diane Arbus and Nan Goldin, she documented intimate portraits of the culture that she was a part of, which is lesbian culture in the 90s. Her photographs, just like the two of them, they're internationally renowned photographers. And so she also has received a Guggenheim Fellowship 2019 and exhibited in museums across the globe. Here's some really early 1980s photographs, girl billboard and boys billboard. And so she's starting to, I think, what we can get from these photographs is gender representation is something that she's questioning and she thinks is important to look at. Right, and it's fairly subtle here. We just have these three boys active playing baseball, and then we have the picture of a girl being demure with her bows and her pink shirt. And so these are on two big billboards. So it's talking about kind of mainstream culture and gender representation. Okay, and so these are Catherine Opie's photographs of her friends. Pigpen 1991 and Papa Bear 1991. So these are extreme close-ups. And we have these little plaques on them, right? Like they're commemorative. Again, the direct gaze, it's super confrontational here. Like we're pushing confrontation to a point where, in the 90s, there's mainstream culture did not accept same-sex couples. This was a battle for same-sex marriage that, it's only been recently that we've, that it's been, accepted as something, a choice that people are allowed to make, that mainstream culture is finally accepted. But in the 90s, so photographs like Catherine Opie's help to change that culture. art is a really wonderful way to passively communicate an idea or a message. And that allows those that are judgmental or don't have the space or compassion in their heart to think about that people should make their own choices or whatever, that just gives them that opportunity to maybe reflect. So as a kind of political tool, it's passive, but I think it's super effective. And these are kind of political tool. Photography is powerful. Representation is powerful. Crystal Mason and Mitch, more of her friends, again, really confrontational. Like, what do you see in these photographs? I see people that don't want to tolerate the bigotry and the judgments of others. They just want to be who they want to be. And that gets really clearly communicated. There's like no smile on these faces. And they're saying almost like, you have a problem with me, right? Powerful. Here, the figure is turned away from us. I'm not even going to look at you. As the viewer, whoever you are, I'm not even going to look at you. You can look at my back. And you can look at this derogatory term. This is called dyke from 1993. And I've taken that term and I've co-opted it. And to me now, I've made it something that is powerful and something that is positive to me, even though you've used it potentially, right? Thinking about just a general audience member that's used it in a negative and derogatory way. Well, now I've taken ownership of it. I've tattooed it to me, and now you can look and you can reflect on this word. This is Catherine Opie's one of her most famous photographs. This is Self-Portrait Cutting, 1993. And so what do we see here? Again, the figure we have a kind of classical painting background. So we're situating these photographs firmly within the realm of fine art. But the figure itself it's a self-portrait. So this is Catherine. Her back is to us. She's not going to look at us. And instead we are forced to confront this deeply painful desire of hers to have a family that she chooses. She has 2 women, and it's a childlike drawing. So this is like a deep-seated, painful part of her that she is not allowed to love who she wants to love. That the mainstream culture in general is trying to prevent her from loving who she wants to love. And this is, you have a little house and a sun and clouds and birds, and it's like a child's like drawing, and she's carved it into her back and photographed it, and it's bleeding. So these choices, like this kind of action and performative action that she's taken, it really communicates that pain and that longing and that anger. This is Pervert. This is another self-portrait of hers where she's, again, carved the word pervert into her chest. Again, kind of adopting or taking ownership over derogatory words that are used to words that are used violently from others. And so she's taking, okay, here I am. I'm a pervert. Here I am. Let me put my mask on. And again, she's unashamed in who she is. This is another self-portrait where she's nursing her son, I believe, son or daughter, I don't know. She's nursing her child. This is like a Madonna and child pose. And you can see the scar of that pervert on her chest. Extremely brave to present yourself as your true, authentic, raw self, to try to present through your work, through a portrait, the true nature of who you are. It takes an incredible amount of strength and bravery and courage. Here's some photographs of her friends, right? And so we have this like lesbian couple and their daughter, and they're just in their typical American dining room. There's toys in the background, right? So no longer confrontational. This is more, this is documenting a lifestyle that looks pretty normal. I don't think I've seen anything more normal than this. Again, some friends in a kitchen. Beautiful, the light in the background, kind of natural environment, and this living room or kitchen kind of environment. We even have a crucifix in the background there. And another couple in their backyard. And some photographs now, we don't even need people. This is a portrait of, these are portraits as well, you know, of people's domestic living situations. Okay, so those are our 3 photographers for this week. Please read the Roland Barthes and do your written assignment. And next week, we're going to be reading Susan Sontag, and I have a bunch more photographers for us to look at, and have a good weekend.